Welcome all to my paranormal closet, where the stories and magic take place. My guest today is an author and YouTuber. His book on monsters is what caught my attention. Please join me in welcoming Josh Nanocchio. Hi,
Hey, how's it going?
I'm great, thank you. Thanks for joining me.
It's a beautiful morning. Can't complain.
I don't know if you know it, but I write about true account hauntings and other strange phenomena. So I was fascinated enough about your book, Monsters, to want to have you as a guest on my show because I'm finding there's a lot more out there than I even realized. Bigfoot, I'm familiar with since I specifically added other strange phenomena to my original title because of all of the Bigfoot stories coming into me from around my county, even very recent sightings. And they were so good, I had to do something to be able to get them into a ghost book. But there are others I'm unfamiliar with, like Dogman, for instance. What is that all about?
So Dogman is like the I don't want to say it's a new phenomenon because it's been around for a minute, but it seems like it's kind of just recently, like in the last 10 or 15 years, really come onto the internet. And I think part of it is also people's just fascination with the concept of werewolves, but dogmen are not werewolves. And so like even my son who always asks me, he's like, well, what's the difference? I'm like, well, the easiest way to break it down is werewolves are obviously, fictitious things that we've created for Hollywood movies that they involve someone shape shifting under a certain condition, like for example, like a full moon. But a dogman is physically they're almost the same, but they're their own. They're their own creature. They're a cryptid. That there's something that's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. If you go back and you look at a lot of the stories of like the Choctaw and the Apache and the Chickasaw, they all have these crazy stories of like fighting dog people, dog humans, wolf humans. It's really frightening, and I mean there's stories that range all over, but definitely the Midwest a lot, right around the Oklahoma specifically. If you go up, forgive me because I'm not too familiar with the names of the tribes up north. I know the Algonquin, but they got stories too. I know people talk about Wendigos and stuff like that in their folklore, but they there's a lot of stories from just the tribes alone from the Midwest up to the north of just encountering these beings. Now that kind of takes us to modern day, and it seems like in the last, I kind of became aware of it probably around 2014, but I think it's been surfacing on the internet probably closer to, I can't give exact dates here because I don't know, but I'm assuming probably the end of the 2010s ish, or like 2009 ish. Just people are just talking about, hey, like when I was growing up, I had an encounter with this like dog like thing. I don't know what it was, and so I'm not exactly sure where the name Dogman took place, but you hear some of these stories where it's like, hey, listen, like my grandpappy from like the 1950s was out hunting and he came across this like wolf human thing, like back then, there's no concept of a werewolf. Like you don't know what it was. It was just a thing that you're scared of. It's some sort of alpha predator. They don't know. And I've obviously, with the 1980s and 1970s, we had the American Werewolf from London. We had Silver Bullet. We had, gosh, that there's just a plethora of werewolf movies came out. I think that really kind of helped shape the werewolf culture. So now people have that in their heads, like, oh, I saw a werewolf, but I think it's actually whatever
Dogman,
these creatures are that people are seeing, the dogmen.
right?
Yeah, so now it's just kind of taking on a life of its own, and they're coming out. Like a lot of people are sharing encounters. I've had some really terrifying ones shared with me. There's one in the book specifically that talks about. I think it's like one of the first ones. There's a gentleman who was driving his truck late at night. There's something that happened with his engine. I don't remember what it was, but he pulls over to the side of the road, and it's been a while since I read the story, so forgive me. But in essence, he hears a noise, turns around, there's a dead deer, and he sees this long hand come out and grab it, and a wolf-like head pop out, and it literally terrifies him. But of course,
Mm,
that's just one of hundreds. I know Vic kind of he has a host of Dogman stories. The National American Dogman Project, I believe that's what it's called. Uh, they have hundreds and hundreds of encounters that people have submitted to them. Phantoms and Monsters, but with Lon Strickler, hundreds and hundreds of encounters with dogmen. So I mean, like it's just you don't have to go very far to see that people all over the United States are encountering some sort of bipedal wolf, which is completely terrifying. Hope that answers that question.
oh, it sure does. It sure does. Now, what about flying humanoids?
Well, that's its own rabbit hole. um, yeah. So in my time doing what I've done, I've also ran across a lot of them. Which ones do you want to talk about? I mean, there's
Oh,
everything from
there's a bunch of different kinds.
yeah. Some people report fairy-like beings, like not like the Disney Tinkerbell, but like actually like smaller humanoid-looking things. All the way to kind of gargoyle-looking things,
Oh,
bat-looking
okay.
things.
In my world, they've been referred to as elementals
Mm,
because I've had people calling and saying, yeah, elementals like fairies. Some elderly gentleman, he was like 86 years old, and he's a follower of mine. And he messaged me and he said, oh, because he likes going out for his walks with his dog.
yeah.
And he likes taking his phone because he loves to take pictures of the deer herds and just things that randomly grab his attention. And I also feel that he's extremely sensitive to this sort of thing because he'll see something and want to take a picture of it, and then he'll go back home and he'll look at his pictures and he'll be like, oh my gosh, look what I caught. So he is definitely sensitive to spirit and these things to some respect for him to pick this up on his camera. But he sends me this picture of, he says, I think it's a leprechaun. And no shit, I look at this thing in this picture, and everybody that I've shared the picture with says they feel it's an elemental, but it looks like a freaking leprechaun would look like. This little guy, standing there like with this big smirk in the middle of a deer herd. I have to send you the picture and get your take on it. But he is just so perplexed, but he's convinced that it's something. And he says now when he goes back to that particular area, he catches it quite often. So it must live in this little field where the deer herd traverse.
It sounds to me like what you're describing is a fairy, and I say that because so Josh Cutchin, for any of you listening, if anybody knows what it is, he is a very big 40 and paranormal researcher author, and his specialty is like folklore, like fairies and things like that. And he actually works for me. He really educated me on the whole fairy thing and like kind of describe more what they are and how they kind of come from Europe and how they were here and what they do. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And so a lot of like sightings like that, like little people, uh, it's just there's so many stories of people finding like these. I don't want to say little people, but oddly dressed people that look almost like look elven or something in the woods. They're gone the next second, or people being taken underground to like a herd of I won't say a herd, but maybe like a colony of these smaller people, maybe like this big pygmy people, just all sorts of stuff. I'm not too knowledgeable uh, on the fairy aspect, but Josh is very educated on that. So I have a few videos that kind of goes over that, but that's such a deep, interesting topic. In fact, there was one story, and I believe it's from around the 1800s, 1900s, where a boy who was out playing was approached by a mysterious woman who had led him to a house where there was a party. But apparently, when his family went out looking for him, like that there was no such house, there was no such person living where they were. And so he's convinced it was like, fairies or woodland beings who just, made themselves known to him. I'm giving like a very shortened
Sure,
version of the
sure.
story, but that's in essence what it was. But it's just like, wow, like there's some stuff going on that we have no idea, and
Do you think
why
it's
why they keep themselves invisible.
do you think it's
I don't know.
interdimensional, and why are they here? What are they doing?
I mean, I think we have to look back to a lot of. I don't want to say a lot of native tribes have the answers, but they certainly have a lot more information than modern day society. Because I feel like if you look at a lot of modern day society, they kind of scoff at this stuff. It's pseudoscience. It's not legitimate to them, and I understand. Like from a pen and paper perspective, I get it, but you know you go back and you hear all these stories from all these different tribes and you look at their I wouldn't say their folklore, but you look at their legends and they all tell the same stories over and over. They're just with different names in different locations. I'm talking about the Seminoles, I'm talking about the Choctaw, I'm talking about the Apache. It doesn't matter who it is. They all got something similar. And then so you take that as your foundation, right? And then you start to like kind of hear more of like the firsthand accounts. And not just like a modern day 2015 account. I'm talking like accounts from like fur trappers and like hunting or hunters and trackers from like the 1800s who are like, hey, like I was out looking for deer or for a buck, and I came across this like 2 foot tall being, and then he was gone, or he took me underground, and like they didn't know what the heck that stuff was. They had no concept of a fairy or a Tinkerbell. It was just like, we don't know what it is, but they're kind of just obscure writings, as most people claim, because it's like a one-off account here, one-off account there. But there is some historical documentation that does talk about it. Then you kind of move into more modern times. Now everybody has a cell phone. Everybody can kind of tell about their account, and there's just a lot more of this stuff. And it's like, clearly there's something going on that we don't know. But I want to go back to the flying thing for the moment, because that kind of does attach to it in a way. You had mentioned initially, you did mention the fairies. You mentioned elementals. What I think is interesting about the elemental discussion is that people have reported seeing, like bat squatch, some sort of like large, hairy bat-like creature. I've heard people seeing
Isn't that like
pterodactyls.
Mothman, kind of Mothman sort of
Yeah, yeah,
thing?
yeah. Mothman, Thunderbird. That's a whole other thing. Apparently a lot of natives had stories about that coming with a storm. Apparently, there's a lot of stories of it like stealing women and children from like the field where they're gathering wheat and stuff. Just we're talking about a not like a condor. We're talking about a massive, massive bird that had supernatural powers to it. Um, like I said, I mentioned the dinosaur thing that's been happening a lot more recently. Just apparently anything that like flies, like reptilian, bat looking, whatever. Mothman, gargoyle, that's another big one I see a lot of. In fact, I've seen a lot of accounts that people refer to the fly. Have you ever seen Jeepers Creepers? Well, if anyone
I
out there
was
has
I
seen
was just
Jeepers
thinking of that
Creepers,
when you said the flying bat-like thing. Jeepers Creepers was
yeah,
the first thing that came to my
people
mind.
have talked about seeing Jeepers Creepers looking like things, and just it seems. I have to kind of be careful here, because I know some people are in this realm of cryptozoology are very much in this box where like everything is just strictly flesh and blood. We don't have answers. Other people are like, well, these have to be supernatural. I'm definitely I lean towards, I'm like, it would make sense that these are supernatural because they can go in and out of our dimension. And a great way to think about that, because I know a lot of people get like, well, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, wait a minute. If you look at it, and I've actually discovered this girl on YouTube. I can't remember her name, but she actually explains the dimensional thing quite well. So, if you're 3D looking in at 2D, you can pretty much alter anywhere on the plane. You could see past, you could see present, you could see future, and you could alter things on a 2D plane without a 2D person, assuming that one existed, without them ever knowing, right?
Right.
So we're obviously dealing with entities that are potentially fourth dimensional, if not more, which means that they can come in, alter, do things on our timeline at any given time. In fact, there was oh gosh, I'm trying to remember what it was. There's a thing on Facebook I saw where someone had taken a picture of the same location every single day for 365 days, and they stitched it together, and it was like this perfect panoramic shot of like January 1st to December 1st, but each day was this tiny sliver, so it looked like it faded from like winter to spring to summer to obviously like back to fall. And someone had mentioned, they're like, hey, this is kind of like a really crude illustration of like what 4D looks like. And it kind of clicked to me. And I'm like, this is probably somewhat where like a 4D person can see on a timeline where I'm like, hey, like I can go in at any point in this time and they can't. You think, because like a 2D person couldn't see a 3D person, much the same way we couldn't see fourth dimension. So it would make sense that a fourth dimensional being of some kind could come in at any point and do what they want, and then also vanish. We would have no idea they're manipulating our time and space. So there's a little bit of science, some crude science for you, but you know, I'm like everyone else. I don't, I'm not some PhD, you know, academic or academia. I'm just trying to look for answers like anybody else, and hopefully can find some, just using some explanations with like, well, it has to be this because of this. And you look at all these other accounts. I get to a point where I'm like, flesh and blood just doesn't make sense. There's just too many bizarre accounts, too many accounts that are attached with like demonic behavior, um, too many accounts that come off as spiritual, where there's like spiritual qualities to it, whether it be an odor, whether it be behavioral, whether it be they're here, they're gone, or they do impossible things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know if I really hold on to the flesh and blood thing. But then there are other things that would make me think that way. So obviously there's plenty of Bigfoot accounts where people have physically shot and or killed these creatures.
I've
And it's
never
like,
heard that. Well, I shouldn't say never heard it. I heard like in the 1800s, somebody during a hunting excursion shot a hairy being. That's the only thing I've ever heard. I've never heard of anything more recent. Have you?
Justin Smedja supposedly shot and killed one, but I don't know too much of his authenticity. Some people say he's lying. I'm not an expert on the guy. I just that's his supposed story that he shot and killed a young one of these things. For those that don't know the story, the very condensed version is that he was out hunting in the Sierra Nevadas. I'm trying to see if I can remember this. I think I'm trying to see if the mother something went past him, something was near him. He tried to shoot at it, and for some reason, a youngling came to him and he shot it in the face, or he did say he knew he killed the youngling, and they were looking at it, and it wasn't like a baby. It was probably like I don't know, just a juvenile. And him and his partner were looking at it, and they're like, "Oh, it's ugly. It looks like a chimpanzee, or it looks like something." They didn't know what it was. They weren't like, "Oh, it's Bigfoot." They were just like, "Oh, I don't know what this thing is." And so that was so when people are like, well, they are flesh and blood, how do you explain these stories? I don't know. I don't know what the trade-off. I don't know if there's certain beings that are strictly supernatural. I don't know if they can come in and out, and then also they manifest and stay in this dimension. I don't have a book on that. But what I do find interesting is that there's also multiple stories of like people. It kind of goes both ways, where people shooting at dogmen, either the bullets do nothing, they bounce off the coat, it doesn't have any effect, or they shoot at it and there is blood, and there is something. Sorry, I'm trying to see if my cat's in here.
That's all right. Your cat can join us. I love animals.
So it's either one or the other, and so that's why I'm always like, there's stories that kind of provide both, but in my opinion, I feel like there's far more stories that kind of aim for the whole. That's definitely kind of supernatural. That it's more.
I would kind of question that other guy's account of shooting a juvenile. What happened to the carcass? You didn't think it was strange enough for you to keep it and bring it back and show the world? I mean, you could have had $1 million picture right there, or $1 million catch.
Let me get to it, because this is a really great topic. So we're in a field, right, where people are desperate. They're hungry for photo video evidence, right? I get a lot of complaints for like, how come you're just telling me, bull sense, or excuse me, bull crap stories with no video or picture? I don't really get video and picture. And if here's the thing too, if I were to get really compelling video and picture, even if I were to post it, there'd probably be a quarter of people that are like, oh wow, that's awesome, like that's really convincing. But the majority of people, no matter how good, would say it's a hoax. I mean, like, think for example, if you got a photo of Bigfoot, you were 20 feet away from the guy and you had a DSLR camera, right? Like high quality, you snapped a perfect camera. How many, even though it's legitimate, you're like, holy crap, I'm the first person ever to take an actual like in focus picture of Bigfoot. Think of the majority of people, probably 9 out of 10 would be like, oh, it's a hoax. It's too perfect.
No, I get it. But if I had this carcass,
like, there's no winning. There'll
if I
never be
had
the
that
perfect.
carcass, you bet your bottom dollar I'd be dragging that carcass back into society, just like in Jaws when they caught that fish and they hung it from the hook and said, "Look what we caught." I would have been doing the same thing. Not that I would have never shot at it. I would have never tried to, because that's me.
Yeah,
I'm not.
the body.
But
Yeah.
if that's what they did, I would have been that person to take and go, "Look what I got." I would have brought the news in. I would have brought everybody in and said, "Make what you want of it. I don't care if you believe it or not, but here the shit is." You know what I mean? Who wants to pay me for the carcass?
And why? Who knows? That was my thinking too. I think he took a picture of it, but I'm like, why would I would put that carcass on my back and I would drag it in like, hey,
Absolutely. Yep, damn straight. That's a money thing right there. If you shot this thing, even if it was an accident and you shot it because you got the shit scared out of you and this thing came at you and you didn't know what the hell it was and you shot it, I would have definitely brought that back and gotten something for it. So that's my take on it and how true it is. I mean, he got attention, but he could have gotten way more attention and some money out of it if he was looking right.
I agree, and unfortunately, I feel like this kind of thing right here, along with like the picture thing I was saying, is probably why this field will always be looked at as just pseudoscience and like having no factual basis, just because like how do you operate in a field of, I guess you want to say, science, because science is just data where there's no like which everything's anecdotal, everything is firsthand accounts. I could see why most skeptics are like, it's just I have a hard time buying it. But then you have all these people, these poor people who've had actual like firsthand encounters, and they're terrified. They don't know how to explain it. They're just like, listen, I was here, I was doing this, and like this happened to me. I don't have the science to explain it. I know it's real. I'm terrified of it, and what do you do with these people? There's thousands of them. Thousands. I've read and heard, and just you hear so many accounts, and I know people say, well, I'm sure there's a lot that are lying, which, yeah, of course there are. You have to factor that in, but there's no way that
Everybody's lying. Correct. Where do you get the stories from? Do people reach out to you and say, Hey, I have a monster story to share with you.
No, I don't think anyone's used the word "I have a monster story," but people are just like, "Hey, like I've had a weird experience," or like, for example, in the book, there's a gentleman who reached out to me. It's one of the Bigfoot stories, actually. Him and his buddy, they went hunting on that private ground in Florida. So if anyone has the book, they want to read the story, refresh my memory. But
Skunk ape.
yeah, it was this hunting ground. I don't want to say it's a hunting ground, but it was just private land owned by a company. I can't remember the because it's been a while since I read the story. But anyway, they get permission. They go there. They're all alone in an RV with four wheelers, and they start getting attacked by. They don't know what the heck these things are. They weren't like, oh, it's a skunk. They were just saying that these large things. You know that they're beating on the trailer. They're pounding. They're trying to like. They were very, very hostile or
Mm.
hostile against them. Very aggressive, and so they had to leave like the following morning. But it's like you read it and you're like, oh my gosh, like, this is terrifying.
I have a
Uh,
personal friend here up in Sussex County who has had his encounters with Bigfoot in this area, and same, it's a hostile encounter where he and his family were in their camper and these things went at it. So I've heard those kind of stories before for sure.
Yeah, it's incredibly frightening. You know,
I'll bet.
obviously like Dogman, like that's a whole other thing that people talk about. That's incredibly frightening as well. Just because a lot of the nature of those are very violent. Unfortunately, there are stories where people don't live to tell the tale. Probably when if someone were to ask me like what's probably one of the most disturbing, chilling Dogman encounters you've ever come across, the only one I mean there are several, but probably the most recent and the one that comes to mind is the story of Joe Barger. Forgive me, Joe, if I'm pronouncing your last name wrong. I met him at a Dogman conference last year, and funny enough, he wasn't like out there getting attention. I was sitting at a table talking to Tony Merkel, and him and I were just chatting. And I don't remember what we were. I think we were talking about Dogman. I do have. I don't remember what we were saying, but he's just kind of like listening, and he kind of just chimes in. He's like, "Yeah, I shot one." And Tony and I are like, look at each other, and we look at him. We're like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, like I shot and killed one. It was trying to get into my truck." I'm like, "Please sit down and tell us." And so he's like, "All right." And you can tell he's just very calm. He's like, "Well, basically, long story short, I was a truck driver. I think it was back in like 2016. Um, he was up in Michigan. I don't remember which part, a northern part. He was going up a hill, and as a trucker, you have to like shift gears. So he's going like maybe 25 miles, and he looks up, and there's this thing riding right alongside his window, looking in right at him, and it's not only looking at him, but it's also like looking down at the door, and you could tell there's intelligence in his eyes, but it's also trying to find a way in his truck, and it reaches its hand in because he has the window partly down, and it's trying to stick his hand in to find some way to open the door to get to Joe. Now Joe has his, I believe he had a 357 right there on his I don't know if it's on the seat or the what somebody will help me out here in the whatever the
Tab
section is
in the
between.
tab on
Yeah,
the
yeah. So
console.
yeah, so he's the poor guy's going 25 miles an hour. He's got a big load behind him. He's going up a grade. It's not like he can like floor it, and so he just grabs this thing and shoots it right in the head. It falls down. But apparently he was thinking that there was another one coming up to flank him on the left hand side because he wasn't
Right.
checking his mirror up here. Um, so anyway, I guess he comes around the area, and I guess there's a strange couple. I won't say a strange couple, but there's a couple. They're standing kind of like right near the spot. I'm hoping I'm telling this story right. There's a couple standing near the spot, and he kind of stops. He's like, "Hey, is everything okay?" They're like, "Yeah." They're like, "There's just some weird sounds going off in the woods. It sounds like two bears fighting." And I believe the body that was there initially was now gone. Either something dragged it away. There's more to the story than that, folks. You have to go and check that episode out. But that's basically, in a nutshell, what it was. And when he was just telling this, it was just he wasn't like sitting there telling a story. He was just like, "Hey, I'm doing this, and I see this thing, and I'm like, can you describe it in detail?" He's like, "Yeah, it had this and it had this," and you could tell it was really tough for him to recall. And I'm thinking to myself, I've never in my life sat down with a human being face to face and like them like genuinely tell me their experience. It's always been like over email or over the phone, but like, dude, I shot this Bigfoot, man. And I'm like, okay, that's cool, But he was so like
You could actually
genuine
see
matter of fact. You could
the
tell he was like
emotion and the facial
he lived it.
expression.
He's like, listen, he's like, I don't want anything from this. He's like, I'm just, I kind of want to forget about it. Because like I don't know what the heck it is. He didn't say it was a werewolf. He never used that word. He just says, I don't know what it was. It was just big. It was tall. It looked like a wolf, and it was trying to get in my truck. It used its hand. It was smart enough to know that what the door handle is, and it couldn't figure it out. But he said it kept looking at him and looked down at the door. And as he's saying that, like, I'm just getting chills because I'm like, the fact that it's
I'll
intelligent
bet.
enough to know to open the door and trying
Yeah.
to get in to get to you. But he said it was probably like 10 feet. It was huge, just a massive thing. And so when he
Wow.
shot it in the face, obviously it fell down and started to like do the death convulsion. It was right there in the it's not a ditch, but it's the part of the road that kind of like divots down. I don't want to say it was a ditch because it wasn't a ditch, but anyway, people get the idea. It was on the side of the road, and
Right.
yeah, but that's probably one of the stories where I'm like, wow, like that's well, but there's a caveat, right? There's more to it. So I guess 6 months later, it wasn't that too much long later, he actually gets detained by an unmarked SUV of some kind, and he gets brought to a location, and they start like questioning him and saying like, oh, we can make we can make your entire career go away, we can freeze your bank account, and he's basically like, what do you guys want from me? He's like, they basically told him like, you killed one of our assets. You remember that?
Oh,
And he's
wow.
like, and they're like, you shouldn't be talking about this. Like, you don't need to be, you don't need to say nothing. Um, they weren't like, we're from this government. They didn't
Right.
say. So it's just like, what the heck is going on?
Wow.
This
Be
is like
like
2016, 2017. And so he's like, yeah, I stayed quiet about it for years. That's why he's kind of like, I don't really want, anything from this. He's like, this is just, I'm just personally one person to person telling you that. And I was like, can I tell your story on my show? He's like, yeah, that's fine. That's okay. Go for it. I was just like, wow, dude.
Have you checked recently to see if he's still around?
Yeah. He's still around. So I'm like, I don't know what
Government
the game.
engineered in scientific lab kind of critter. Oh
Well,
my God.
I've heard that the military like uses these as weapons, or they have, I guess, a sect of them as weapons, but
No
we'll
kidding.
never know the truth. Well,
No.
who God only knows what they have that they have. I've heard people tell me supposedly from the inside that they have their own like thing of these things, and a lot of times what you're seeing now is ones that are loose that are killing people. I don't know. For all I know, I probably have plants emailing me, purposely giving me misinformation to share. I don't know. Who knows? Either way, to
Jeez.
that story, I'm like, yikes. That doesn't make you want to stay inside. Nothing will.
Well, even that Jeepers Creepers one, damn, after that movie and you think there's actually something out there like that? Oh my God. No, thank you. Um, Getting off the monster topic, what do you make of the most recent UFO sighting in Nevada? Was it Nevada? Las Vegas it was, I think.
Oh, which
Where
one was that?
recently it was like this whole neighborhood of people saw this thing in the sky, and then next thing they know, these see these gray beings, and there were so many. It was on the news. It was on media, mainstream media, and they were talking about how all of these people in this neighborhood saw this thing, and the cops even came and got something on their cameras, and they actually showed that footage. It almost sounds like it was something that happened, and somebody said it could have been a meteor, but the fact that it was followed by them seeing these gray beings and so many different people in different instances in that neighborhood having an account. There's actually some young kid, I think probably 18 or 19, who actually did a TikTok on what he saw on it. So you could probably catch that somewhere. But I caught it on mainstream media and the news. And I was like, what? What is this? That they actually are
Jeez.
reporting it. You didn't hear anything about that? It was a couple weeks ago.
I mean, I don't actively like always like look for this stuff, but a lot of times I have people that'll like bring these things to my attention. But I'm just now seeing some things about it that they saw strange aliens, or they saw 10 feet stuff. Here's the thing. I feel like definitely more than ever, you're gonna start seeing a lot more of this stuff. Um, I don't know what the media's agenda is. I don't mean to sound really conspiratorial here, but it seems like there's this thing right now where they're really trying to slowly push their narrative that UFOs are here and that they're going to start having more sightings, and that, so I don't know if that's legitimate. I don't know if that's just my own thinking, but it kind of appears that way because it's like
And the thought has
ever
crossed my
since you had
mind.
the whole, the Pentagon's releasing information about the UFOs that,
Mm-hmm.
they've been here all this whole time. And it's like, it's almost like they're kind of slowly warming the public up
Gearing,
to it.
gearing us
And
up to something. Yeah.
yeah, to what I don't think anybody knows yet. So, you know, it's hard to say, and I'm saying that because like that's just how they're kind of approaching it. But at the same time, a lot of people are also saying, it could be a meteor, it could be this. But then you have, like you're saying, a lot of people who are like, hey, I legit saw a 10-foot tall like alien being. Like you can't. That's not a meteor. How do you make that up?
Yeah.
We don't know. But the fact that it's becoming more mainstream is definitely. I would definitely say it's frightening because that whereas like 20 years ago it would have been quickly swept under the rug, but it's like the fact that they're like making it mainstream means that they're definitely trying to condition and warm society up to the idea of it. So that way when something big happens and maybe like I don't know, they come out and say, "Hey, we've been here this whole time. We're your gods now. Every religion you've ever established is wrong. We're the right way." To me that seems like how you would pave the way to that. If that's the
Right.
case, but I could be wrong. I'm not claiming that's what it is, but um who knows? I
Oh,
don't know. But to kind of like go directly back to what you're talking about specifically, um, I definitely know that like Las Vegas, Arizona, New Mexico, that there's especially California, like Los Angeles, Southern California, is a huge hotbed for UFO and just like light anomalies, seeing grays, abductions. There's also cattle mutilation. That area is just a hotbed for it, all the way down to like Western Texas. I'm not sure why. I know people talk about the DUMBs, the deep underground military bases there, like Dulce, Area 51. Area 51. I don't know how much of the connection that has with the amount of accounts there is, but I can say this that something's going on. Something
right.
strange is happening for
How
sure.
long have you been investigating and researching this stuff?
I don't know if I would say investigating and researching, but yeah, because when I think that, I think like guys who do it like really seriously, they're doing all day every day. Um, it's more of like a passion, a hobby of mine, like looking at this stuff. Probably since like 2014, 2015. I kind of got, I can actually remember it vividly. This is back in 2013. I was on the bus ride home from the place that I was interning at the time, and I don't remember why, but I was like, I just want to like read like Bigfoot stories, like Bigfoot accounts. And I remember that's like when I kind of first hopped on the BFRO and just started reading account, and then that would further evolve into looking at like dogman encounters and kind of listening to those podcasts, and it kept like evolving and evolving to the next thing, and like listening to more stuff and like researching this, and somehow it wouldn't be till 2018 that I started like narrating stories, and then from there it kind of just evolved into me kind of doing my own show, like what I do now, and then I realized at a certain point once I had some like income coming in from it, I'm like, I need help. I can't because I was spending like all day like researching some of the stuff, and I'm like, I need people to I need to expand our team here. And so I was fortunate to get a few good people who can like now do a lot of this research for me. And then of course now I have access to like really good people. So for example, like if anybody out there knows about Mysterious Universe, they're a great resource, great website. Josh Cutchin, he doesn't write for them, but he's a really good author. I have him on my team. Brett Swanser, who I'm like working on and off with, he actually writes for Mysterious Universe. Really educated guy, great dude, really smart, just knows a lot of stuff. He's like one of their main writers. He also does some stuff for me now, and so really, I feel like the amount of things I can cover and what I can talk about greatly help because I have people who are very intelligent, very their feet are very wet in this field, so they know a lot of things, and so then kind of already help use their knowledge to kind of help mold and shape like what we can talk about versus just me having to do every little bit of thing. Because a lot of times I'll do stuff and people are like, oh, you missed this, this, and this, and this. Like, dude, what do you? I can't cover everything in a 30-minute episode. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
just take it for what it is. Come on. So, I think that answers your question, right?
Yes, it
I want to
does.
make sure I answered it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I still try and like research and like look at this stuff even on my off time, even if I'm just like looking around for like an episode. Because, like for my episodes, I love to be able to tell a story, but then also integrate that account or story of like someone's past experience along with like information. So like things that had gone on, like say like if it's like the Wendigo or the I don't want to say the Batman, but like the Bat Squatch or something, right? So that way they have not just an encounter, but they also have information that goes along with it. So I feel like that's huge. And so yeah, you do kind of got to do some digging. And unfortunately, like I said, in our field, there's not like books. Well, there's books on this stuff, but there's not like an encyclopedia of cryptozoology where you can look back and see every little thing. And if there is, somebody should please let me know about it. So a lot
Yeah.
of times you just have to do a lot of online digging.
Tell me about it. Tell me. Well,
Beyond
that's how
just
I
first
found
aid
you.
accounts.
That's how I found you. I had to do my homework.
Yeah. So that's yeah.
You talk in your book about sea monsters for real? I've heard of Loch Ness monster and Champ from Lake Champlain, but what other ones are there?
Oh, SEMA. Oh, this is probably one of my favorite topics. Not because
Oh,
I'm like
really?
extremely knowledgeable on it, just because the topic of things living in the ocean are just downright terrifying. So, this is a really, not to be punny, but this is a really big pool of information to pull from. And the reason why is because, God, I'm like, we can talk about this for a while. I'm just trying to think where to start. So obviously, like, we have the Leviathan, right? And it's talked about in the Bible. We don't know what that is. That's its own thing. That's supposedly this huge sea entity that lives. But I'm not going to go into the biblical part of it just because that could be its own thing. But people do, they talk about sea serpents, and we're talking about things that aren't just like oarfish. We're talking about legitimate like serpents, snakes. In fact, I just did a video recently. I can't remember the captain's name, but it was back from the late 1800s, early 1900s, and he was out off the coast of Brazil. I want to say it was, and huge coral reefs. So there's a lot of food, and he witnessed two of these things, probably about over 100 feet in length, probably about 8 feet in diameter. I believe I have that right. Maybe 8 inches, probably closer to maybe 3-4 feet. I don't know. Anyway, he saw it wrapped, coiled around a sperm whale, taking it down. Uh, so it's like you have things like that. There's other things like the merfolk. I wouldn't say mermaids because that paints a Disney picture in your head, but fish humanoids. There's a lot of tribes that talk about it. A lot of stories, not just from like American, but tribes around the world. There's a few stories from Greece where people have seen these things. In fact, I'm actually editing a video today that I shot the other day. There's actually a couple of USSR like divers who are in the Black Sea and the Arabian Sea. They've seen some weird stuff. And actually, I'll say this because it's fresh in my head because I just did it. Um, this is back in the 1980s. There was a group of five, I want to say either Ukrainian or USSR divers, and they were in the Black Sea, and they noticed this strange, like, cube-like structure on the floor. And so they go down to, like, investigate it, and they hear this strange voice reverberating all throughout the water that says, "Don't do that, don't do that." And they're like, "What the heck?" And I can't remember if this is, because there's several of these stories, and I can't remember if this is the one where they go to touch it, and all of a sudden things around them turn to like an ancient Greek-like structure, like ruins, and they see these tall humanoids, probably about 3 meters in length, wearing these silver-type bodysuits. Um, there's another account of them almost doing something similar, where they see these humanoids swimming in the water. They go to chase after them, and they claim they were approximately 164 feet down. They go to try and capture them. These humanoid beings retaliate, and they use some sort of like force mechanism, some sort of weapon that actually pushes them so far, so fast upward. They actually, three of them died from decompression sickness
Oh,
because of
wow.
just how fast you're being forcefully pushed up.
Mm.
I mean, gosh, I'm there's so many. There's another dude. He was in Finland. I'm trying to think where this was. It was a bay. He found this like strange cucumber like object. He went to go retrieve it. He couldn't get it open. He couldn't pull it up with his car, like with a levee. So he used a pneumatic drill. It cracked open. There's a bubble with the strange like white thing in it. He didn't know what it was, but it actually lashed at him, clawed him. He faints. He gets
The
pulled out.
blob.
Just, yeah, and there's so many like these like little stories here and there, and it's just like um there's one of an East Indian man who was working on an oil rig. This is, I want to say, back in the early 2000s. This one there's not a whole lot of information on, but he was probably about 200 feet down, and he saw this really large black. He described it as black shark come near him to kind of check him out, and it was curious, but he said it was the largest shark he's ever seen. He estimated it to be anywhere probably between 50 to 60 feet. It was jet black. He said he was terrified, and the only lights down there at 200 feet were from like the glow of his work lights. So I mean, like the area is like loosely illuminated, but it's not like it's brimming bright daylight. I believe it was in the evening time, so it was dark. So it's not like there's a lot of light. But he could see this thing just checking them out, and then eventually lost interest. But there's stuff in the ocean that we just don't know,
Oh, I'll
and
bet.
I'm trying to give you guys the digest version, but there's just people reported all sorts of things. I mean, just from like the mermaid merfolk thing to, I don't say Leviathan, but to like large serpentine like creatures. The only ones I've actually not heard of, I don't think I've heard of any stories of like people seeing a mesosaur. And for those of you that don't know, mesosaurs are like the aquatic um, crocodilian looking things, right? Everyone knows the plesiosaur, like the Loch Ness, but yeah, you don't really see the mosasaur one. There was a story, I want to say from the 30s or 40s, had to do with a battleship. shooting another ship, I want to say, and then in the explosion of the enemy ship, they see this giant, like 50-foot long, like uh, uh, amphibian, reptilian, crocodilian, whatever it was, fly up into the air and then land back down in the water. The entire crew saw it. What do you make of it? Nobody knows. Um, I don't have any stories of like the Kraken taking down a submarine, nothing like that. Just they like there's things in the water we don't understand.
I
And
mean,
then of course there's USOs. Oh, go ahead, go ahead.
the ocean is so vast and so massive
Yep.
that who's to say that these prehistoric dinosaurs didn't survive, some of them anyway, and are living at the bottom of the ocean in caverns and come up every so often. I mean, I can see that being a possibility. I mean, even still today, you hear about people discovering different creatures that we've never known before in jungles that have never been visited beyond recent, you know what I mean,
Oh,
times. So
100%. Yeah, well, to piggyback off that, I people might think I'm crazy, but I kind of really buy into the idea that megalodon could still exist, and the reason why is because if you go down to South Africa, they've found some strange stuff. So, for example, they found carcasses of whales washed up on shore with humongous bites taken out of them. Nobody knows what that's about. And people will say, oh, that's just a one off incident. Well, here's the gig. You got to follow the food chain. What do sharks like to eat? Seals. And guess where a lot of seals gather at a time of year? South Africa. I want to say, I
mhm.
don't remember. Someone who's really educated on this would know exactly what I'm talking about. But I can't remember if there's an island or if there's a piece of land. There's something in South Africa where at some time of year, like a lot of seals gather and it's the food, right? You migrate. So megalodons, assuming they exist, they migrate. They follow where the food is. For anyone who says it's impossible they can't exist, I think that's nonsense. There's so much room for them to hide and so much room for them to stay low. Um, I mean, look, we didn't even rediscover I believe coelacanth, right? Coelacanth. Uh, it's like this supposed prehistoric fish into like what the last 10, 15 years. We assumed they were
Mhm.
extinct. How come they weren't found until recently? So it's like what I was
Exactly.
going to say. Yeah. What I was going to say was that people say, "Well, there's not enough food." I'm like, there's whales. And when you're seeing whales wash up on shore with massive chunks taken out of them, you know, I
Makes
just
you wonder.
I just can't buy into the idea that the largest shark there is that we found is a great white shark. I mean, you think what in the last like when did we really start like diving in the ocean and like looking like really taking marine biology seriously in terms of like exploring and like noting species? What, maybe the last 100 years where we could actually dive into the water and like really see? We don't know nothing. So I feel like people who claim that megalodon can exist, doesn't exist, I think that's extremely foolish. I think it's extremely naive. We don't know. I can't claim it does because I don't know, but I'm just assuming that if it would definitely migrate to where the food is. And sure enough, that's what I'm saying. You're seeing the whale carcasses wash up in that area where the seals are, where there's plenty of food. And I think there's another time of year where they go somewhere else. I don't exactly know the migratory patterns, but sharks. We already know sharks are migratory anyway. They're very intelligent. They follow where the food is. They don't just stay in one area and hang out. And so, if you really are talking about a 50 to 60 foot, if not bigger, predator, it's not going to be up at the surface. Plus, I've also heard many stories from military personnel of them seeing large fins breaking the water. Black fins, mind you, black fins, which
Mm.
is strange because that kind of goes along with the account I was telling you about. That's far larger than any great white, which is strange. And so that's kind of what happens in this field, right? You kind of like get so many anecdotal stories and things here and historical things there, and you start to notice uh, these similar things going on. So you start like kind of drawing strings all over the place. You're like, oh well, that matches this description here and this here and here and this, and then this guy did this here, and you're like, oh my gosh, there's like this like web, right, where everything's kind of interconnected somehow. And it kind of just helps to bring authenticity to I guess what you're looking at, what you're discovering. Maybe that's not the right word, but investigating, I should say. Um, I don't want to say it proves anything, but you're like, well, that's definitely weird if like six different people under this like 150-year time span reported things something similar in the same area. It's like, and none of them know what it is. None of them claim to know what it is.
Makes you
Um,
think.
yeah, it's just, there's just weird stuff. I know that they were military personnel. It was like off the coast of Australia who reported seeing these massive man of war like things. Um, but like that's all they are. Unfortunately, there's no pictures. They're just anecdotal stories. So it's like
Right.
My thing is, I always tell everybody, listen, I just present you information. You know,
Right.
you got to make it what you will, because like we don't know how much is fabricated, how much is exaggerated. And I know one big thing that people come at with is like, well, how do you you know, like, how can you verify? You can't verify. That's the
Right.
issue. You can't verify any of this stuff. So really, it's just take it as is. And I know people get really offended at the whole, well, we'll take people's things with a grain of salt, but you know, you kind of have to, because if you
Yeah.
believe everything, then you're gullible and naive. But if you choose to shut out everything, I feel like that's just as bad. So it's like you got to be open minded, but got, you know, take things with a grain of salt and be like, okay, well, you know, that's very interesting. If true, it could mean this, but you know, could also be false. I think that's what makes our field, the whole supernatural, paranormal, 40 and cryptozoology, so interesting.
On
Just because,
another note, I'm a paranormal investigator, and so when people ask me, well, you know, what's your proof? I'm like, you can believe me or not. I know what I've experienced, and I'm sharing it with you. Take it for what it's worth. I'm not trying to
well,
convince anybody. That's how I kind of leave it.
right. Yeah, it's like NDEs, right? A lot of people like they don't exist. Well, thousands of people who have had an NDE, they can't describe like what you're doing. They can't describe. They're gonna like, listen, like I've had this experience. I don't have any proof. I don't need proof. Like I believe. You know, that's hard. You know, because you're dealing in a realm where it's like science can't tread because there's not enough data. You have no way to measure the data. You have no way to capture the data. So how do you? But I also feel like solely relying on science is wrong too, because not everything is quantifiable, not everything is capturable or recordable. So it's like I feel
Exactly.
like saying that would be putting life in a box to where everything can be captured. It really can't. There's a lot of things we don't understand. There's a lot of anomalies we can't understand. And I know mankind in our arrogance tries to think that we know everything and tries to box everything. Well, that can't be true. That's ridiculous. And then they come to find out, oh yeah, we were wrong. You know, it's just so like going back to the paranormal thing. Yeah, people are like, "What, your little EV device?" I'm like, well, just so you know, like, there is a
That is
difference
good.
in electromagneticism, if that's not the right word, and electromagnetic waves and stuff. When you have, do I say entities? There is changes in the room. Like you can feel things. Like how would you document that? Like, where's the science to that? You don't know. But if you go in a room where there's something that you can feel it, you know there's something in there. There's a presence. That there's a shift in temperature. There's also, if you
A
look at
lot of different things going on. It's not just one thing. It's a whole bunch of different
yeah,
things. And if there are
yeah,
a lot of people that are sensitive to spirit, one's experiencing this and that and the other, there's got to be something going on. And then when you start catching data and footage in one way or shape or another, it's kind of undeniable that something has transpired.
that's why they're anomalies, because like we don't have the devices to capture this yet. One thing I think about with what they call spirits, or whatever you want to call it, it's energy, it's frequency, it's something. Because like even the EVs, I don't know exactly how they work or what they do, but they pick up on the frequency, like a change of frequency. Like educate me here on it, but I know kind of that's the gist, right? They pick up on some sort of electrical wave. There is a shift. There is something different. There's
Are
something
you
there.
talking about the K2s or when we have recordings on audio recorders? Are you talking like the EVPs? Is that what you're talking about? Because there are a
Um,
bunch of different ways you can catch.
because that's
Um,
the voice phenomenon. I know. I apologize to everybody. I sound really ignorant with ghost stuff, and like
that's
just
okay.
paranormal devices. But you're right. I guess there's multiple, right? You have the, is it called like a ghost box? I know you have those, but then
There's
you have,
there are multiple devices that are out there that people use. We like to use the traditional methods of interconnection with them on my particular team. We do use audio recorders because we want to try and catch voices. Yes, we do use cameras to take pictures, of course. But as far as communication, is a lot of them use their own sensitivity, and I'm not nearly as gifted as some of the people on my team. So I'll use like dowsing rods and a pendant to try and get responses in yes or no. But it's kind of like everybody together there utilizing what they have, whatever gifts they have, to get some sort of footage. So we do get photographs, we do get audio. Audio is, I think, great because especially
great.
if you have a bunch of women in a room and you get a male voice, then it's kind of like, where the heck did that come from? And some of them are
Yeah,
just so
that's
clear,
audible.
clear, audible. It's like, oh my God. And they responded to a question that we proposed. So that makes it even more exciting when
Well,
something like that happens.
and if this is all pseudoscience, and it doesn't exist, then like people like you and yourselves, and of course many people who do, you know, EVP sessions, and I don't want to use the word ghost hunting because that makes it sound silly, but people who actually like thoroughly explore these cases in these locations, they all have the same, like you're saying, these dowsing rods, these all these things that can actually, like, hey, like where there is there's something going on in this area, this room, this building, whatever is that is abnormal to what the signals that we're getting somewhere else. How do you explain that? You
Right.
can't. There's
No.
just something going on. Now,
Yeah.
I have actually a little story that I think you might be interested in. So my dad, I'm not going to go because the whole story is very long, but I'll give you the part of it. Back in the 70s, he was living in Colorado with his girlfriend, and he saw on this late night show that he was talking, or one of the guys was talking about, you can actually communicate with spirits using a tape recorder. This was back in the 70s, so you couldn't, the tape recorders you had then, you had to actually plug in an external microphone. You probably know what I'm talking about. And in case people don't, it's one of the old,
Sure.
I don't remember exactly what it is, but so you had to buy, like, the tape, you put it in, and if you just hit
Hmm.
record, nothing will happen because there's no input. Well, the guy on the show was saying that if you go to a graveyard, hit record, it'll pick up high end frequencies. And my dad's like, "Oh, that's cool. We should go do that." But he didn't go to a graveyard. He did it in his own house where he'd already had some like weird stuff going on. So long story short, him and his friends go over that he pulls out a new brand new TDK tape cassette, still in the thing, unpacks in front of everyone to show that it is a brand new tape. There's nothing on it. Sticks it in. Boom, hits record. There's no microphone. They're sitting around for about 10, 12, 15 minutes joking around. If there's any spirits, ooh, thinking the whole thing's, just ridiculous. They go to play it back, and what my dad describes was a Jimi Hendrix reel played in reverse, along with all sorts of like crazy screaming demonic noises. And he
Oh.
said him and his 4 or 5 friends, grown men, were, pardon my French, but scared shitless. They're huddling, they're shaking because they're like, what the hell is on that tape? And yeah, like
Oh.
like voices like that. They're like, we don't know, So it's like, and so even he goes around to his work at the time, and he's showing everybody this tape. He's like, what is this? Nobody can figure it out.
Mm.
You know,
We didn't
these
mess
are
with it. We
things that
didn't do
bother
anything.
me.
We just pressed record.
Yeah, you know, where to even look for answers? You really don't. We
Yeah.
don't have answers to that. That's beyond. And it's a shame that the majority of people would laugh that off. They'd be like, oh, well, they can't. It's just like, it's our brains can't comprehend something, so our first instinct is to deny its existence. It's very,
Mm.
very strange. Even like you think about, humans are that way even about death. We all know death is coming at some point or another, but you don't, it's almost like you deny that it happens, right? You don't think about it. You're like, I don't want to go there, right? It's almost like it's a defense mechanism of the brain, almost, where it's like you can't even fathom such an idea, and it scares you. I think that idea frightens most, not just death, but all the things that are going on. It frightens people so much. It's just easier to deny it exists. You're like, that's just nonsense. I'm
Mm.
not. No, I'm not even going to entertain it. It's nonsense. Yeah, because it scares you. If you knew it was
Well,
real, you'd have to accept it. And I think that's where a lot of people in the paranormal cryptozoological field are. We're like, listen, there's stuff happening. We can't explain it, but it's, yeah, it's incredibly frightening. But here we are.
well, you wrote volume one. Does that mean there's going to be a volume two?
At some point, yeah. I had talked to my publisher, and we were planning initially on May, as in like May of, like, a month or two ago. But I don't just want to like fill a book full of stories and like throw it out there. I want to make sure that it's like good, and I want to make sure that it's. I'm trying to think of the right word here. I don't want to say entertainment. That's not the right word, but I want to make sure that the stories are definitely.
Did you get it right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I really want to go through and because I mean the first one I kind of had to go back through and pick, hand pick through a lot of different things, and it's kind of an amalgamation of a lot of different stories, and I would kind of like to repeat that going into volume two. Um, but yeah, I've definitely like to have a little more like nuance with each story. Um, Pick accounts that stand out more. 'Cause in the first one, there's definitely accounts that are similar, and I had such a huge library to choose from. And I know people say, "Why don't you just do that again?" I mean, I could. It's just really a matter of time. So yeah, it'll
I
come out
know
eventually.
time is really difficult, especially when you have a podcast or a YouTube channel. I mean, it's rough to try and keep up with it and normal everyday life. But if you do get around to volume two, let me know and I'll have you back on the show.
I love it. Yeah,
We'll help you promote that. Tell the listeners where they can find you and your books, anything about
So
you.
yeah, so you can find my book anywhere on Amazon. I don't know if it's on any other publishing platform. I'm sure it is, but yeah, check it out on Amazon. It's called The Big Book of Monsters by Josh Nanocchio, Volume One. And if you want to find my content, just go on YouTube and look for What Lurks Beneath. What Lurks Beneath. It'll be my little face with the little red, or it's red colored, whatever. You'll find it. And I cover everything from strange, mysterious, dark, and weird in storytelling format. So
I
yeah.
love that title. Love that title. Well, thank you so much for joining me. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Yes, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
And listeners, if you like listening to this week's episode and you're into all things paranormal, check out my other show, Eleanor Wagner's Creepin' It Real podcast out of the Coast to Coast Entertainment Network, which is available wherever you get your podcasts. And if any of you are interested in reading any of my books, you can find the links to them on my website, authoreleanorwagner.com. I write about the history of the town and location, add the paranormal story to the mix, and finish it all off with photos and evidence. Everybody loves a good ghost story, but there's nothing better than a true ghost story. So check it out, authoreleanorwagner.com. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.